Hi, everybody. We'll just give everyone maybe about a minute so that other folks can trickle in. All right. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. And welcome to our webinar, Service with Security, Navigating Fraud Trends in the Restaurant Industry, presented in partnership with Moneris, a proud preferred partner of Restaurants Canada. My name is Anna Pham, and I'm the Director of Content here at Restaurants Canada, and I'll be your host for today's session. So, as we all know, from refund frauds to terminal theft, and of course, chargeback abuse as well. We've been seeing more and more fraud cases making headlines in the news. And of course, this is a clear sign that it is a growing concern for operators across the country. It is imperative to stay informed and proactive as well. It is essential in safeguarding your business and protecting your customers' trust. And of course, just as important, this is information to take back and share with your team. So everyone from the front of house to the back of house knows what to look for and how to respond. So that's why we're thrilled today to welcome Maria Cameron, Director of Risk Management at Moneris. Maria leads Moneris' strategy for detecting, measuring, and managing fraud risk. And she, of course, will be here today to walk us through current industry trends, recent fraud cases, and actual strategies to strengthen your business's fraud prevention efforts. Just a few housekeeping rules as well before we dive in. Today's session will take approximately 45 minutes and followed by a 10 to 15-minute Q&A. Please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions at any time. And then, of course, we'll be addressing those at the end of the discussion. And of course, a recording of this webinar as well will be shared with all registrants following the session. So please don't worry if you miss anything. And of course, if you have any sort of technical difficulties, please let us know using the chat box, and then our team will do their best to assist. So with that, let's get started. Please join me in welcoming Maria.
Thank you, Anna, and welcome everybody. So again, just to stress the point, we're going to talk about some ways we can navigate through the fraud. Our agenda today, we'll talk about some fraud trends, security by payment methods that might be helpful, any red flags that will help in identifying fraud, how to respond to suspected fraud, and tools and strategies for the future. So first thing we want to talk about is some of the fraud trends. So let's start with some statistics as of March 31st, 2025. As you can see here, we've had 12,815 cases of reported fraud. Again, these are reported frauds. There's about 9,092 victims of fraud and over $165 million in losses. So in the first 3 months of the year, we are seeing that we're on trend for what's been happening last year. Fraud losses are significant, especially considering many cases go unreported. Fraud can impact anyone. However, based on recent Payment Canada study, Canadian businesses experience a higher rate of payment fraud, roughly 20% more than consumers. So individual customers at 13%. Fraud can impact anyone. However, based on all our statistics, it's growing at the merchant level. Regardless of exposure, many of the same practices for preventing fraud apply to consumers as well as businesses. So everyone should keep their PIN safe. Business owners should implement secure passwords and admin restrictions on their terminals. If it looks good to be true, it probably is. Unusual transactions are always worth a second look. When customers experience fraud, they report the transaction to their bank. So as merchants experience fraud, they should report it to their processor. So we'll talk about some common types of fraud. So what may come to mind first are more high-tech or automated forms of fraud. A form that that is encountered a lot and everybody sees it is where a fraudster sends an email, a text, a phone call to either trick the victim, i.e. the merchant, into sharing information, or deploy malware, also seeking information. Phishing can be used to steal large volumes of credit card data, which fraudsters then will check through card testing or card enumeration, which is an automated process where the fraudster will test each card out by making numerous small transactions or even dollar or same dollar amount through your checkout page. The goal is to validate the information that could be used at a later date for larger purchases. That brings us to clean fraud, which is the act of successfully making a purchase that appears legitimate, but using stolen credit card information. How else can stolen information be used? Well, account takeovers, gaining control over a user's account to make purchases. A form of fraud that's increased dramatically over the pandemic with the rise of e-commerce. We've also seen fraudsters redirect merchant settlements by updating contact information. An account takeover is avoidable by being conscious of phishing tactics. Reshipping fraud or catering, making a fraudulent purchase and contacting the shipper to redirect deliveries, or paying a freight forwarder to act as a delivery recipient who then reships the goods to the fraudster. In the case of a restaurant, that would be someone placing an order by calling or sending an email, and it's urgent. They need supplies done, or a large catering order, and then they pay over the phone, and then a white van comes and picks it up. You can be due diligent and take their driver's license and license plate, but most often that's stolen. And then there's refund fraud. Occurs when a fraudster abuses a business's refund process. This could mean making a fraudulent purchase online, using stolen information, and going to a different location or a different physical store to be reimbursed. Almost 30% of all fraud cases that involve refund process is on a stolen device. Abuse of the refund process and employee-led refund fraud. Cases involving refund fraud grew 11% year over year. And it's also the most common fraud type reported by many regions, including Ontario, Atlantic Canada, Quebec, and Manitoba. Remember, fraud is a crime of opportunity. The refund process can become vulnerable if businesses aren't careful. Ensure that you've applied passwords to your terminals. Only authorized employees know it, and limit access to refunds by using administrative controls, which are readily available on your payment acceptance device. I can't find my mouse. Okay. Friendly fraud. What's friendly fraud? Also known as chargeback fraud. Friendly fraud involves the customer making a legitimate purchase and later disputing the charge with their credit card company. As a result, the charge will be reversed and the fraudster will be reimbursed and retain the purchase. This form can account for 70% of all credit card fraud losses to our merchants. It is important to note that a transaction may be charged back for many, many different reasons, only one of which is fraud. In some cases, the customer may initiate a chargeback if they don't recognize the charge on their card, or they don't receive the goods on time, or see a clear way of engaging you to resolve the issue. Later, we will cover some steps to try and mitigate both fraudulent and legitimate chargebacks. Device tampering and theft. So this is another form of fraud that includes tampering with the device. Advanced and organized forms exist where fraudsters may work in pairs to distract the store owner or the cashier and tamper with the device. They may even swap it. The goal ultimately is to capture sensitive payment information like card numbers, expiration dates. Installing a card skimmer may be another form to capture this information. There's also more basic forms of tampering. When a device is left unattended or without proper password protection, fraudsters may alter the transaction details to reduce purchase amounts, avoid paying the bill entirely, or even issue refunds to themselves. Looking at refunds on stolen devices specifically, this type of fraud grew 3% year over year and now accounts for 16% of all reported cases, making it one of the most common types of fraud in Canada. Consistently monitoring your terminal, having passwords enabled, setting admin restrictions, and checking for signs of damage to your device is important to mitigate risk. Again, we can go a little bit further into this later on. So next, we're going to talk about security by payment method. So transactions carry different levels of risk. After discussing the various types of fraud, taking preventative measures may seem like a hard task. However, understanding the risk and the different type of transactions and levels of risk with each can go a long way in preventing fraud. So on the left side, card present, chip, mag stripe are one type of fraud, which are lower risk versus card not present, digital, and keyed in. So card present, tap is the lowest risk. Card is present, followed by chip and pin. Again, card is present, as this helps validate the identity and ownership of the card. Swipe, although the card is present, it's the least secure because it's harder to verify the cardholder's identity, especially if they don't sign a receipt, there's no agreement, or if the receipt isn't kept on file. Next, we talk about higher risk, card not present. Online transactions with 3D Secure are the lowest risk of card not present, as this feature allows for authentication of transactions in real time. So again, online transactions with 3D Secure. Digital transactions or online transactions without 3D Secure, still a little bit better than manually keying it in, as there's still some methods of validating the transaction. And the worst or highest risk is keyed in, manually entered, is the least secure of all, because again, the cardholder's identity is almost impossible to validate. So let's talk about manually keyed or mail order and telephone fraud. The acronym for that is MOTO fraud. Why is MOTO fraud higher risk? Well, mail order and telephone order fraud continues to be the most common type of fraud within Canada, contributing to about 62% of all reported cases in 2024. The cardholder's identity can't be validated. There's little evidence you can present to prove a transaction was valid. Manually keying or entering card information can also be prone to error. Card brands also impose fees to further discourage this type of transaction from taking place, which adds to your cost of processing. Therefore, if a cardholder disputes a charge that was manually keyed, your business is left with a loss and there is no recourse. So you've lost product and you've lost your money. Instead, use an online payment gateway like Moneris Checkout, which can integrate with a variety of fraud prevention tools. And 3D Secure is a great example, which will shift the liability to the cardholder. E-commerce. Instead, if your business processes a lot of card not present transactions or MOTO, e-commerce will allow for easy integration of security features that can authenticate transactions in real time. You can provide your customers with a smoother checkout experience. Features like 3D Secure also shift the liability from you to the issuer, which will further protect your business. As a result of a lower risk, your interchange fees will also be lower. And also, we can set you up with a payment request feature through our Gold portal, which is another good alternative instead of manually entering through a virtual, manually entering it through the virtual terminal versus you manually entering it through your device. So red flags. So reviewing your transactions is best practice. However, combined with knowing signs of suspicious transactions, it also becomes a fraud prevention best practice. Check for unusual amounts, especially on your e-commerce site, if you have a website or a checkout, such as transactions for a cent, a dollar, a penny. Again, unusual, repetitious, same bin, same 6 digits of the card in quick succession. These small amounts or unusual transaction will happen quickly. Again, with similar amounts, this type of fraud, the fraudsters trying to test the different cards. They're trying to validate the information they have is correct in order to make larger purchases later on. Other things to look out for if you're shipping anything. A single address for shipping, but different cards. Another red flag is related to that is another red flag would be being asked to ship to a different location or an unusual location, such as an industrial building where goods are typically not sent, or versus to a home where typically your product is not sent. High value items that is urgent or requires expedited shipping, as fraudsters want to receive the purchase as soon as possible to avoid being caught by the issuer or cardholder. Orders made up of multiple big ticket items. Fraud is like running a business. And big ticket items offer the highest resale value. Additional care also needs to be taken around international orders for several reasons. From a fraud perspective, address verification is almost impossible to complete. And how to respond to suspected fraud. Based on the red flags we covered, if you spot anything suspicious or suspicious transaction that you feel is fraudulent, there's a couple of things you can do. If you catch a suspicious transaction prior to closing your batch, which means submitting your transactions at the end of the day for settlement, you can void the transaction. This reverses the transaction before any money exchanges hands. If you cash the transaction after you close the batch, you can refund the transaction. This again reverses the transaction and returns the money back to the customer that has been deposited into your own account. Thirdly, I'll just add another thing on that. And if it's a large catering order for restaurant, and before you send anything out and you're highly suspect, it's okay to call your payment processor. We will help you. So contact your payment processor. So I jumped ahead there. Okay, next, we want to talk about tools and strategies for the future. Tips for mitigating risk and chargebacks. As mentioned earlier, not all chargebacks are fraudulent. Some can be service related. In both cases, there are a few tips to help you avoid chargebacks or disputes. Display your return policy clearly on the point of transactions. Provide contact information so the customer has the opportunity to settle any disputes with you directly instead of initiating a chargeback. We also encourage you to obtain receipt of delivery in order to verify the items were delivered. Ensure proper authorization of the transaction. Remember, just because you get an approved message on your device doesn't mean it's authorized. It just means there's credit available on that card. For online transactions, consider a real-time authentication tool such as 3D Secure, and try to avoid swiping or manually keying transactions as possible. Why they reduce chargebacks? These tips avoid service-based chargebacks as they give customers the opportunity to speak to you directly and resolve the issue. And for fraud-based, adding 3D Secure or following best practice help you ensure you have the information you need to fight the chargebacks. Whoops. Tips for in-store fraud prevention. For in-store transactions, this is where best practices and just small changes to your day-to-day operations can make a big difference. Choose to accept only card present or contactless transactions and avoid riskier types such as swipe or manual entry. If necessary, and for higher risk processes like manual entry transactions or refunds, please set administrative permissions with password protection. Never leave your terminals unattended. Consistently monitor and regularly check your terminals for signs of tampering or damage. If possible, keep terminals safely locked away. Minimize access. Level set this with your employees that you will be actively monitoring all terminal usage. And finally, get access to Merchant Direct to monitor your daily deposits for any usual refunds or any unusual activity. And again, if in doubt, give risk a shout at Moneris. Layer your fraud prevention tools. The first layer of fraud prevention involves standard payment best practices, such as reviewing your transactions regularly and only accepting secure forms of payment, adding additional layers. CVV, which is the 3-digit code on the back of the card to validate the transaction. AVS, this is a service that uses to match the billing information with the address on record with the bank or the issuer. Further advanced fraud prevention tools, there's 3D Secure, which offers real-time authentication and shifts the liability, fraud chargeback liability, back to the card issuer. It's also known as Visa Secure, MasterCard Identity Check, and American Express SafeKey. Use hosted checkout and tokenization services. This replaces credit card information with a unique identifier, a token, and it's stored securely by your payment processor. Therefore, data is more secure and you don't need to store any of that information. In addition, you can use AI-based solutions, which leverage behavioral analytics to offer you a real-time risk assessment. So, a few final takeaways. Fraud is consistently evolving. It's important to stay on top of fraud trends, be mindful of the risks your business may be exposed to. Also, let me change this sheet. These best practices make a big difference. Payment best practices are the first step in catching and preventing fraud. Use a layered approach. Not one solution will be an end-all be-all. When looking to add fraud prevention tools, consider a layered approach for increased protection. And again, if in doubt, give risk a shout. That's it. Any questions?
Thank you, Maria, for that. If any folks have any questions, please pop into the Q&A. And while you're doing that, I actually have a few questions. So my first question is just having been able to work in a lot of really, busy services with quite a few hands and quite a few, staff members touching machines. I kind of envision this moment where operators are looking at the machines and they don't really know if the machines are tampered with. Is there a way that Moneris has like photos or resources on how to show operators like security check-ins or security audits with their machines?
Absolutely. You can go to moneris.com/fraud. There's a lot of information there on device tampering and what you can look for. Or you can contact Moneris at 1-866-319-7450. We will be more than happy to help.
Okay. Okay. Amazing. And then I also have another question as well. So, of course, there are businesses of all sizes, and some might solely use standalone mode and not have integration into a POS system. Do you think it'll reduce risks if everyone makes sure that they move towards integration?
It will help. Absolutely. It will do nothing is 100%. It does reduce your exposure to fraud losses by
Okay,
moving into integrated. Absolutely.
great. And then, of course, I know you had mentioned as well about, pins and codes. Is there a recommended time of when people should, change their PIN and code, or, can people kind of use their same code for, the 2 to 3 years of them working there?
Yeah, no. You should change it just like any password. You should update it regularly. Your staff comes and goes. People communicate to others. And unfortunately, we've become aware that a lot of merchants share the passwords with their staff because they're too busy. Oh, here, go ahead and do it. And they remember it. It's good practice to update your password or your code and I would say that every 7 days, but some people do it every 30 days when other people change staff. But secure your device. That's the big one. But you can restrict who has access to that password. It reduces your risk.
Yeah. And I'm sure that is applicable across everything, not even just your terminals. So,
No, it's
yeah.
true. I mean, you see it in some larger establishments. They only have one device that is capable of doing refunds. They might have 10 devices at their restaurant, but only one of them is used for refunds. That's or enabled, because in case they want to refund something, that's the good practice. That's really good practice. Leave it with a supervisor or someone. You're only watching one person versus all your staff.
Exactly. Exactly. We actually have a question here in the Q&A. So this person had mentioned that we had a manually entered credit card transaction complete with the expiry date and CVV. The fraudster took our Clover device and backed out the transaction and manually entered the card information. The card was, of course, authorized. We as a merchant had to eat this cost. Any thoughts on how to stop this in the future?
Yes, so you need to put administrative controls on all your devices. So again, enable refunds. So whenever there's a refund request enabled on a device, if there's some controls on it, a password has to be enabled, and don't use 1234. So do that. Also, when that happens, it's imperative you call your payment processor. There are ways we can try and for reversing that activity, but it has to be done really quickly, because we can engage the issuer and say this was fraud, and we normally get a lot of cooperation with our issuers if we contact them as it happens. If you wait a day or so, we may not see it. The funds are gone. So if the funds are available, they will hold that fund and give it back to you. The other thing you can do is, again, secure your device. But remember, when you get an approved message on your device, all it's saying is the transaction was approved by the issuer, saying that there was available credit on the device. It doesn't mean it's not fraudulent. It doesn't know that until it goes through the whole algorithm. And a cardholder might not see it for 2 or 3 days, or get one alert on the phone, and it's after the fact, and then they call their issuer and it starts a chargeback. So the faster you act whenever you see anything like that, the better the resolution. Moneris, we work with issuers all day. This is what our department does. If we see something, we will contact the bank, we will work with the authorities, we will ask you for what information, if you have any footage, and we will force post that transaction back. So
Great, thank you. I also want to bring up, a question about internal coverage without making your staff feel like they're feeling distressed. Um, do you have any insight on how operators could have any sort of fraud prevention from internally? Not assuming, of course, but
yeah,
always better safe.
yeah, there is employee fraud is on the rise, especially refund fraud. Again, look at your transactions.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to do things overtly. Put administrative controls on your devices, add passwords that only a few people have, so you're only watching a few people. But
Yeah.
if you're looking at your transactions at night and you see a pattern of refunds, and the cue is you look at the refund, but there's no matching purchase, or the purchase might be for $1 and then the refund was $300, you would question that. You need to contact your payment processor right away. We can help. We can contact the issuer to find out who the card belongs to. We can initiate an investigation. Absolutely help you. But again, if you're putting those administrative controls up front, you don't have to watch over them as a hawk. But just as you look at your own credit card statement to see anything unusual, you would look at your transactions to see if there's anything unusual.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the people closest to you are the ones that, and again, it might not be the employee. They might be sharing that information with somebody else.
Right, right, exactly. Perfect, thank you. And then just one more question for me, but of course, everybody else in this webinar, you are more than welcome to add more questions into the Q&A. I know, Maria, you had mentioned earlier for folks to go to the Moneris website. Is this where Moneris is offering, of course, other resources and templates as well to help food service businesses build fraud prevention into their staff onboarding and also training programs as well?
Absolutely. At moneris.com/fraud, there's a whole slew of information. We also have some YouTube videos I could share that will help businesses protect themselves.
Okay,
But it's
great.
important that they pay attention to frauds that's happening in the industry, because just because it's not happening maybe in the restaurant industry, i.e. shipping things overseas, you can see that pattern that may help and see how I addressed it. Catering. We've seen catering fraud where people in a white van will come up and order a bunch of food with a key transaction and then disappear and
Wow.
it charges back. So there's a lot of things that you can interpret for your business and take away from that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think what would be helpful, Maria, is if you and I can connect after this. I'll look at the website and maybe curate a few resources, kind of work with you on that. And then we'll include it in the recording email that goes after this webinar to all folks who have registered. Another person had asked here, can an employee issue a refund to their own credit card? And if yes, how can we stop this?
Yes, they can. Yes, they can. So again, it's watching your, you know, your devices, putting administrative controls, maybe reduce refund limits. So here's an example. Some people have a really low, when they onboard with a payment processor, they're thinking that having a large refund limit is good. No, it's riskier. Reduce your refund limits. If you need a particular higher refund limit for that day or for one order, you can call your payment processor and we can assist you. Absolutely, we can do it for you. So if your average ticket size is $100, maybe your refund limit should be $100 per ticket. That will reduce your risk. And again, monitor your transactions. If you see that credit card without a matching purchase, contact your payment processor.
Yeah, and you know what, just to kind of echo what you're saying here, I know it's a bit of a pain to have a low limit, but I remember when I was GMing a restaurant, we also made sure to do that. And sometimes when it was over, you could do more than you could do partial refund, so do chunk A
Correct.
and chunk B. But then at least that obviously, you know, how many refunds should you be doing in a day anyways? It is an extra step, but it does give you that sense of security as well.
Correct. But and you also can go into Merchant Direct and
Mm.
do it online. You can do the
Oh,
refund.
oh,
You
I
can
didn't
find a
know that.
purchase and click a button and refund.
Oh, is that new?
Yep.
That's great. That is really great. And is the turnaround, I'm assuming the turnaround, the money just goes back
It's
into
instant.
your
It's
guests.
instant. Yeah.
Okay, great. Does anybody else in this room have any questions? Maybe give you another minute or so. Okay, great. Well, again, thank you so much, Maria, for joining us today. Again, like I'd mentioned to everybody in this room, of course, you know, we'll properly curate a few resources from Moneris to include in the email with the recording and of course the slides as well so that you can refer to and also include in your training. Like I said in the beginning, the most important thing is being able to translate this information to your team. As well as at the beginning, when I did mention that there has been a few headliners in the news, I'll share that as well, just to use as case studies for folks to understand what's going on right now in the industry. And then, of course, if you have any questions, we will have Maria's email in the email, as long with, of course, ours as well. If you have any questions with Restaurants Canada, please feel free to reach out. Again, Maria, thank you so much, and everybody enjoy your day.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.